This is a photo of a man called Kenneth Smith. And this photo was taken by a motorist, Jessica Pittman. She was driving through Mississippi in November 2016, and she saw this man standing next to the road selling bundles of firewood. And she took a photo of this because the man seemed exhausted. He'd been standing there for many, many hours, and he wasn't having a lot of luck. And she pulled over and she asked him what he was doing. And he told her this story, that his wife had passed away a few months earlier, and he had been left with tens of thousands of dollars in medical bills, a common experience for a lot of people. And because of that, he'd been forced to sell kindling alongside the road to try and pay off those outstanding debts. Jessica was heartbroken at the story, and she posted this photo on her Facebook, and she asked people to donate a few dollars, whatever they could spare, so that Kenneth didn't have to stand alongside that road anymore. Within 24 hours, she had tens of thousands of dollars rolling in from around the world, from as far away as South Korea and Australia. Now, for me, this is an amazing story, because we live in a time when nationalism is resurgent around the world, and people are more worried than ever before that the progress we've made as a global community is passing away. We live in a time of war. There are more than a dozen major armed conflicts raging around the world right now, everywhere from Syria to Ukraine. And we live in a time with the greatest humanitarian crisis of the 21st century raging, the global refugee crisis. More than 65 million refugees on the move around the world, more than the number who perished in World War II. And yet, even as people worry about the future of the world, I think there's another world taking shape. I think the internet is starting to build a global community that is going to change all of those crises and challenges we face. And it's going to make the story of Kenneth become something that all of us are familiar with in our own lives. I'm going to tell you how it's doing that. The first thing the internet is doing is creating a new era of planetary thinking. This is H.G. Wells. I'm a huge science fiction geek. You don't get to work in technology, really, unless you are one these days. But H.G. Wells, he was a huge sci-fi thinker in the United Kingdom, and in the 1930s, he wrote a thesis about the coming age of what he called the world mind. And he thought of this as a free, synthetic, permanently accessible resource that will be available to everyone on Earth, which would contain all the world's knowledge. And if we were able to create something like that, he thought we would be able to unleash a new era of global collaboration. This was a time when people were beginning to wonder if the world again was going back to an age of division and war. And he said that if we could find a way to create something like this, knowledge might just reshape that world. This is the world mind today. This is a map of the internet created by researchers. And you can see, I absolutely love the imagery, when you see all the content that is being shared online, all those different destination points along that massive global network, it almost looks like a brain. And when you consider the content that is being shared online today, the absolute avalanche of data that is being driven by global internet services, you begin to see what that could actually look like. 350,000 tweets are shared every minute on Twitter. Every minute, 3.5 million photos are uploaded to Facebook. And every minute, more than 500,000 hours of new video uploaded to YouTube. That is all the world's content. And if you want to, you can instantly see a vantage point of our galaxy from the viewpoint of an astronaut on the International Space Station. You can choose to see a refugee camp in Jordan directly from the perspective of an aid worker with the United Nations. And you can go and see civil rights protests happening much closer to home. This one from LAX a couple of months ago. And that's with live video, literally the most immersive form of content available online today, almost as if you're actually there. And in addition to all the world's content now going online, we're also seeing the strengthening of existing communities. You can now tap into any community you wish to connect with online. This is a map showing the spread of LGBT groups on Facebook in just the last few years. And really, now that anyone can access those communities, and those communities have the ability to broadcast to anyone in the world, their power and their potential to move the world becomes much, much greater. So what does this mean? A century ago, in northern France, British, French, and German soldiers were fighting in trench combat. Today, this is what Europe looks like according to Facebook. More than 50 billion cross-border friendships connecting the people of all those countries together. It's unthinkable that we would fight a war between those nations anymore, and in many ways, I think it's down to that individual power of connection, the power of friendship to move the world. What does this look like? Again, you see it every day on social media. This is from the Supreme Court's decision in June 2015 around legalizing same-sex marriage. More than 26 million people changed their Facebook profile pictures to celebrate that moment and to support folks who've been campaigning on that for a very long time. You see that with the refugees welcome movement. Hundreds of thousands of people all over the world who've been rallying together to defend refugees over the last few years as that global crisis has unfolded. And you see it with the No Ban, No Wall movement, a group that has come together very organically, very quickly, in response to the Trump executive orders in January this year. Now there are rallies all over the world and organizations standing up for the rights of immigrants and refugees in many different communities. And there was an interesting writing assignment I had a few years ago, which made me want to put this slide in. When I was a speechwriter at Google, one of the things that folks often did to try and stoke our creativity was we used to set ourselves random writing assignments. We would give ourselves really crazy topics and say, you have to write a speech about this, like within an hour. So one day somebody sent me this topic. They said, write an essay on why cat videos on YouTube are profound. And I happily did, because that laughter is the normal response people get to that. But I think those cat videos signify something more. This was a great essay, by the way. I said, those cat videos and all the other content all of us experience on YouTube every day, those are the beginnings of what might be an embryonic planetary culture. The world isn't just beginning to think together, we're beginning to enjoy the same forms of communication and language and media. That is something that is incredibly profound. And that's why when you see memes and viral videos circulating around the internet, you have to consider just how far are those things going towards uniting the world. When the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, the American poet Herman Hagedorn, he said, the bomb that fell on Hiroshima fell on America too. And by that he meant there are moments in our history which are so epic, so challenging to the world that exists today, that they ripple far beyond the places where they take place. The bomb that fell on Hiroshima didn't just change the fate of Japan, it changed the fate of all nations. That is the world we live in today thanks to the internet. The bombs that fall on Syria, the disasters that fall on many other nations, they are our shared disasters too. And they are things that a community of planetary citizens choosing to think together and to care about each other in a way that only the internet has been able to achieve in our history. That is what this promises to achieve. But it's not enough to just think together as a world. We have to act. These crises aren't just things that by showing our sympathy or our solidarity, we're going to actually change. This is a tweet that was posted by an Icelandic journalist in August 2015. And this is a photo taken in Beirut, in Lebanon, of a man who, again, was standing in traffic, holding a sleeping child, doing something that absolutely was an exhausting and unfulfilling activity. He was trying to sell pens to passing motorists. And the reason he was doing that is because he was a single father who had fled from Syria. He was now living in a refugee camp in the country, and he was trying to sell pens so that he could afford food for his 2 kids. And this journalist posted this photo, and within a couple of days, he was first of all able to track down that man by connecting with different organizations and groups who were in the country so that he could reach out and help him. And he was eventually able to raise more than $120,000, which completely changed this man's life and actually ended up with that refugee setting up his own organization to help other refugees escape from a similar situation. At scale, that story is taking place over and over again around the world. Just a few months ago, all of us will remember the Women's March took place, a truly global protest. Global protests are things that have never happened in history before. When we think of the large-scale protests of the past, things from the Vietnam era or things around the Iraq War, those are things that were in fact incredibly localized. They often never connected more than a few 100,000 people in singular locations. This was a moment where more than 5 million people around the world came out on the same day in 81 countries. That is something that is absolutely profound and has never been achieved before. This is the No Ban, No Wall movement. This is a protest I actually helped organize in San Francisco a couple of months ago. And this was another example of how the internet is driving global action. It wasn't a day where people came out all over the world in many, many different cities. This was a local protest. But it was a local protest that was achieved through the power of global organization. We had marketing help from people in Belgium. We had help with fundraising from people in Switzerland, Turkey, and South Korea. And all over the country and all over Europe, there were people who were plugging this event and promoting it to their friends and saying, maybe you should turn up if you're in California today. We had more than 10,000 people come together in just 6 days on the streets of San Francisco. But that was a moment that really resonated with people far beyond that singular community. In 2008, there was another moment, which I love as an example, because it shows just how profound those actions can be. There was a 33-year-old engineer in Colombia, Oscar Morales, and he started a Facebook group very late at night called 1 Million Voices Against the FARC. The FARC was Colombia's terrorist movement that had been fighting this decades-long insurgency against the government. And he got fed up with seeing the reports every week of violence taking place in Colombia. And he said, I'm pretty sure the vast majority of Colombians and people around the world think this is absolutely barbaric, and we're going to take a stand against it. He created that group. Within one day, 150,000 people were in that group. Within 1 week, 500,000 people were in that group. And 1 month later, more than 1 million people came out in more than 40 countries around the world demanding that the FARC come to the negotiating table and that the government begin peace talks. And just in November last year, the peace agreement was finally signed between the FARC and the government, and a couple of months ago, the FARC started disarming, finally, after all those decades of civil war. The internet played a small but critical role in starting the avalanche that led to peace in a country for the first time in half a century. But it's not just in terms of war or the great strife of our time where you see the impact of the internet in driving global action. This is a photo I took when I traveled with Mark Zuckerberg in Indonesia a few years ago. This is in a village called Tampong Kaman. It's in central Java. And we were walking through this village because we wanted to see the impact of connectivity on an ordinary community in Indonesia. This is a place that had just been connected to the internet for the first time in the mid-2000s. And since then, almost the entire village had gone online, and people were learning to use the internet to help with their businesses, to help with education, and to do many other extraordinary things. And this was the owner of a t-shirt store, a very small store in this very out-of-the-way rural community. And he is explaining here in this photo to Mark that his t-shirt store, even though he only has 2 employees and he only has a handful of customers coming into it every week, he still has a thriving business because he sells those t-shirts to people all over the region. He runs what in the old days we would have called a multinational company, basically from a single room in Indonesia. And that is an example of how the internet is reshaping economies in a very, very dramatic and disruptive way. Research has shown that in developing countries, more than 50% of small businesses go out of business within their first year. For businesses that are able to connect with new customers across borders online, more than 80% of small businesses in developing countries are still operating after 1 year. For small businesses, the chance to become a multinational is absolutely the great opportunity of our time. I'm reminded of this famous New Yorker cartoon from '93. It said, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And naturally, it's a dog who's saying that. Nowadays, nobody knows you're a small business online. So why wouldn't you try to sell across borders? This is a village in Bulgaria that I went to just in February this year. And this is a place called Svezan, very rural community. And the infrastructure is incredibly dilapidated. This is a community that used to have about 5,000 people living there. Now it has only about 200 people living there since the end of the Cold War. All the existing industries and agriculture and manufacturing moved out of Svezan, and the community fell into decline. A few years ago, the mayor came to this village, a new mayor who previously had been living in Denmark. He had been born here and moved away many decades ago. But he knew the power of the internet. He wanted to try and get Svezen some help with breathing new life into the community. So he put the village on Facebook. And he ended up fundraising enough money to rebuild the town church and the town theater and to bring streetlights to the village for the first time. And actually, that picture in the center is the town church that didn't exist until last year, entirely thanks to the power of money crowdsourced through the internet. The Ice Bucket Challenge. All of us remember that moment. There was a period where all of us were repeatedly getting threatened by our friends to drench ourselves with water, a very unusual activity for the human race. And yet, that turned out to be an extraordinary example of the kinds of actions you can drive with the internet. More than $115 million raised through 2 million YouTube videos in order to fund research into ALS. And when you think of science, the internet is absolutely leading a new era of global scientific collaboration. This is the Large Hadron Collider. It is the world's most complex machine in history. It's buried under the French-Swiss border, and this thing is a particle accelerator that is working to uncover new secrets about the universe and how it was created. Every time this thing runs, it generates tens of millions of gigabytes of data, far more than any single computer could crunch through. And that's why now, 170 different computing centers in 37 countries are crunching that data together. Scientists all over the world collaborating to uncover the secrets of our universe and how it was created. And that's something which you're seeing in many, many different forms throughout the scientific community. There is a whole new global wave of research collaboration taking place. 1 in 4 scientific publications that exist today did not exist 10 years ago. The number of papers that are the product of cross-border scientific collaboration has more than doubled since 1990. And there are extraordinary examples that are very close to home of how this is going to reshape our own society. This is a project called R-Loop, which is a team based entirely on Reddit that connects people in around 40 countries who are working together to build the Hyperloop, the next generation high-speed transportation system that may well end up allowing us to get from somewhere like Boise to San Francisco in less than an hour. That is a team that is being driven entirely through the internet, and many of their members barely even meet ever in person. I'm going to wrap up by talking about institutions. It's all very well to have thinking and action about how the world connects us together, but how do we make people continue to act together? There's no army or parliament or president or central bank of the internet. There are no traditional institutions that solidify the presence of the internet in our lives. And yet, when we think about the internet's future, this is a design of an international flag of Earth put together by a Swedish designer. This is absolutely the wrong thing to aim for. Those are the institutions of the past. We're not going to be able to replicate them online. We should be looking for movements. This is a climate change march that took place in New York a couple of years ago, the largest climate change march in history. 600,000 people took to the streets in about 190 countries, all rallying for a global climate change agreement. This was driven by an organization called Avaz that has 45 million members in 190 countries around the world. That is an absolute example of how new institutions are taking the place of global governance under the internet. Traditional institutions like Amnesty International, International Rescue Committee, or any nonprofit you can think of, today they are becoming global actors, working to encourage activism and change with people all over the world and across borders. They are the institutions of the future as well. So what comes next? How do we make the internet really save the world? How do we make people use the internet to drive global change and serve this planetary community? First, we need to connect the entire world. Only 3 billion people today are online. That means more than 4 billion people aren't online. And for all those folks, they've never heard of Google or Facebook. They've never used any of these tools. If we want that global community that is emerging now to be truly representative, if we want it to live up to its full potential and truly save the world, then we need to allow the entire world to have a part in that, to actually participate in that world. And that's something that technologists today are working hard to try and achieve. We need to make technology as well serve fundamental challenges around the world. It's not good enough to just build apps that basically take the place of our parents in our lives, delivering food to us, doing our laundry, and taking us on rides to places. That's what Silicon Valley spends half its time thinking about. But there are greater challenges taking place in the world right now, and technology can truly help solve them if we let it. And all of us, no matter what field we work in, what organizations we're in, what businesses we manage, we have a chance to tap into the power of that global community. If you're running a small business, you can make it into a micro multinational. If you're building a movement, you can tap into supporters all over the world. And if you have any art or craft or anything of value that you're sharing with the world, why not share it with everyone, not just the people in places like here, and not just places where there are people like us. I'm going to close by telling the story of my father. This is a photo taken from a trip to Australia I made with him in 2015. And this was the last trip I made with my dad. He passed away later that year. And when we were on that trip, I got to know my father better than at any point in my life. My father had a secret about his past that he'd never really told me about, and that was he was a refugee. In 1942, he was a 4-year-old boy living in Burma when the Japanese Imperial Army invaded the country, and he fled for his life along with his family. And they marched through fields, and they walked through forests, and they went through bombed, destroyed cities, all on their way to try and make it to India to seek salvation and a new life. And along the way, they came to a forest, and in a clearing in that forest, there was an American Air Force brigade. A bunch of volunteer American airmen had come to that country on a mercy mission to try and fly refugees out of that forest into India using a handful of banged-up transport planes. And they ended up flying my father and his entire family to safety and a new life in Calcutta. That, for me, is an amazing example of what happens when we choose to stand up for a vision of the world, of what we can achieve together when we collaborate together, when we choose to go to the defense of the world. If we want to allow the internet and all of its promise to serve a global community to be truly unleashed, then we also have to stand up for that vision of the world and the kind of people that we want to be, and the kind of people that we want to save, people who, in many ways, are like my father today. The whole history, this is a picture of transport planes in Burma, exactly like the ones that flew my dad out. This is a picture of me and my dad when we graduated. Because of what happened, he was able to have an entirely new life eventually in the UK, and I was able to go to college, and that's actually why I'm standing here today. So this is really kind of personal for me. The whole history of our world is a history of communities coming together in new and more complex ways. We started off as tribal societies, and then we became cities. And then just in the last few hundred years, we became nations, a blink in the eye of history. This is taken from 1860, 1 year before the Kingdom of Italy was founded. Now, because of the internet, we have a chance to take the next step, to become a global community, to reach beyond the existing borders and cultures and allegiances that in many ways hold us back, and we have a chance to connect with all of the people who we have yet to know, but who one day we will think of as our brothers and sisters around the world. Thank you very much.